start out very briefly to pay tribute to a friend of all of ours who died not long ago, Jack Nichol. When I left the bad old right-wing soap-red government to go into radio, my first guest on my first day was Jack Nichol. And he at that time was the president of the United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union. And I know a great many of his colleagues said, don't go on there with that right-wing prick, let him suffer. He came on and he carried me for an hour. And he actually got me started and gave me confidence and kept me going. And Jack was a great, great man and much to be missed. And I hope he rests in peace. God bless him. When I saw Victor and Delbert tonight, Garen, and I talked to them a little about this, it reminded me of my very early days living in Vancouver as kids. We used to go down to the Musqueam Indian Reservation. And they had a little creek down there we called Tin Can Creek. It's now more properly called Musqueam Creek. And we used to fish with little shiner lines, little hooks, and a bit of worm, I guess, and catch tiny little things. One day, an Aboriginal kid came down, and he had a gaff in his hands. And first of all, we thought he might be going to use them on us. But then he went up the stream a little bit, and he got down his hands and knees, and he just stayed there. And all of a sudden, he scooped, and he brought out a coho that was like this. And we gasped, but I think if we'd known there were fish that big in there, we'd have gone fishing somewhere else. It was scary. And then he went up and he got another one. And he gave one to me, and I took it back home, and my old man thought I'd stolen it. It's going to give me a licking. But it taught me a great lesson, and that's that coho spawn in the damnedest places. And that river now, the Musqueam Creek, is the only remaining river in the greater Vancouver area that produces wild coho. Thanks to you. And it's a great tribute. It's a great tribute to the Musqueam people that is indeed the case. You know, when we're dealing with the issue of fish and saving them and so on, we have to remember that we're dealing with a bunch of liars. Now, you're not supposed to say that. My lawyer said, don't ever say that, because that may mean you say they're constant liars and they can sue you. And I said, on the basis of that definition, I think I'll take my chances. I go back to 2001, when the Liberals came to power. And the issue then was the escaping of farmed salmon. And John Van Dongen was probably the dullest minister I've ever met, and that's saying a hell of a lot. He came on my show and he said, look, there are only 3 Atlantic salmon ever been found in our local rivers. Now, in the meantime, John Volpe, a very famous scientist, is up to his neck in Atlantic fish that are in the rivers. Only 3, he said. The next week I had the late Stan Hagen on, one of their ministers. He said, oh, my colleague Van Dongen was wrong. There are only 2 fish that have ever been found. And they became, for all time, 3 fish Van Dongen and 2 fish Stan Hagen. But that's the kind of stuff we've had to take from this government. Think about this for a second. Brian Mulrooney, and last time I looked, all of the ALCAN directors have got orders of Canada where they try to put Alexander Morton in jail. What kind of a country is this when we pay so little attention to the real, genuine heroes in our midst? You know, the basic principle in dealing with the environment is the precautionary principle. Very simple. Don't put anything in there unless you know it's not going to do any harm. If it's going to do harm, don't do it. How, under those circumstances, has the onus come on to Alexander Morton and we who support her? Why is the onus on us to disprove? Surely to God, the onus should always have been on the fish farmers to prove they could do no harm. Well, of course, they can't do that, never could do it. We now have the extraordinary situation of the largest shareholder of marine harvest saying we should not have fish farms near spawning salmon. And yet Marine Harvest continues to do it. And when questioned by Alexander Morton, he said, we intend to continue doing it. This is the kind of corporation we're dealing with. They screwed up Chile. I was going to use another word, but I'm told I'm going worldwide, so I should try to keep it down to that. In Chile, the disease wiped out their fish, wiped out the fishermen, wiped out the communities, and left them all high and dry. Marine Harvest. And what did they say to the people of British Columbia? Wow, what good news this is. Because we can now put more fish farms in here, Marine Harvest, and we can capture all that American market that was lost because we mucked up in Chile. This is the attitude that we're dealing with. You know, from the moment that Alexander Morton discovered the sea lice problem, she was on my show and was on continually until somehow I wasn't on the air anymore. Every scientist in the world of any consequence confirmed Alexander Morton's findings. All of the major fish scientists right around the globe. Yet the government kept saying, oh, no, no, we have the science. Well, I had a lovely man visit me on my show in the midst of all this, and he came over from Ireland to verify, or otherwise, the work of Alexander, Alex. And of course he did verify it. No question about it. It was properly done. The conclusions were irrefutable. His name was Dr. Patrick Gargan. And as so often happens, he said to me, look, Rafe, if you're ever in Ireland, look me up. Well, so happened that Wendy and I were going to Ireland. So I looked him up. And he's in charge of the sea lice program in Galway. And he took us out to fish on Loch Corrib. It was a wonderful day. But before we started, and I may break my nasty word rule here, forgive me if I do. Before we started, we went down to his station and met some of the people working for him. And one of them looked at me and said, can't you read in Canada? Don't you know what's happening in Norway, what's happening in Scotland? Don't you know what's happening here? Can't you fucking well read? And I had to say, no, I'm afraid yes, we can't. But that's how notorious the situation was to those who had experienced it. And an experience the provincial government refused to acknowledge was even worthy of thinking